Hello, my vibrant friend. Thank you for being with us today. I say us because I'm thrilled to have Morgan Adams today on the podcast. She is a sleep coach, and we've had other sleep people on before, but she has her own particular story, her background that brought her to this kind of work, and some really cool practical tips. And we're going to talk about sleep trackers. So stay tuned and listen for that today. Thank you, Morgan, for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me on, Heather. Appreciate it.
So I know you've been a sleep coach for about 3 years now, but please tell our audience about yourself.
Yeah, so I've had a variety of different careers, social work to pharma sales to healthcare, marketing, communications. But something happened with me with my own sleep when I was in my mid-30s. So close to 20 years ago, I had insomnia that was triggered by a relationship issue, which I will not get into, but it basically left me in a situation where I had sleep onset insomnia, which is basically trouble falling asleep. I would lie awake in bed most nights for up to 2 hours, often waiting for sleep to come. And after a couple of months of that, I decided that was no longer an option for me. So I went to my doctor and was prescribed Ambien. And I took that for 8 years to help me with my sleep. And, you know, it worked as advertised as far as like getting me to sleep faster. But there were a lot of side effects the next day. And we could get more into that later. But I ultimately decided to stop the medication about 8 years into it. And that was prompted by a guy I was dating, a new relationship, guy who's now my husband. So the story ended up out well, but he basically said to me in a very loving way, you know, when you take these pills, you sort of act like a zombie and it's freaking me out. And to me, that was like a huge wake up call. Like, you don't need to be on these pills anymore. So I did what I don't recommend other people do is I just took myself off of them, just cold turkey. And you know, when you are going off a pill, I'm sure you'll agree to this, but you need to have some guidance, particularly by the person who prescribed the medication. And ideally, also help and support accountability with a coach, because it's not easy. Fortunately, in my situation, I was able to get off the pills without any major issues. And I slept well for years after that. But then when the pandemic started, early, March 2020, my sleep started to suffer again. And I got worried. I did not want to go down that road of insomnia and the pills. So I started just Googling how to sleep. I was just on a quest to like get my sleep back on track. And I got it back on track. And what I ended up doing just organically was just sharing some of the things I was doing with Facebook, like my own circle of friends, and found out that a lot of other people were struggling with their sleep as well during that time. And I just got more and more interested with the topic of sleep. And I had this revelation in 2020. Oh my gosh, you have to become a sleep coach. I had previously had breast cancer a couple years before that. And that was a huge turning point in my own health journey. And I knew that I wanted to do something to help women with their health, but I wasn't quite sure what that was going to be. And when I discovered this whole fascination with sleep, I was like, this is it. So that's really sort of that story of somebody who struggled and became their profession is really my story.
Yeah, that's great. I do want to highlight what you said about when you go off medications, it's important to talk to the person that prescribed them. And that's actually with more medications than people think. And if you're thinking, well, they're going to tell me to stay on it, whatever, I would still just reach out and contact your team, because some medications are really hard on your body, hard on your mind to go off of. And your medical provider can help you do it safely and without as much misery and difficulty. Yes. If they can tell you what to do, because there are sometimes a strategy of going off a medication, whether it's something for sleep or mental health or blood pressure. There are strategies for quitting that they can help you with. And so it can be very important for your health and well-being.
Yeah, good call out on that for sure.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit more. People thankfully are talking a lot more about sleep benefits. I talk about it on the podcast and with my clients because it's very crucial for midlife weight loss. People who don't sleep well oftentimes cannot lose weight, or they can only lose a little bit and they get stuck. Kind of for midlife women, what health benefits do they need to think about?
Yeah. So I think for midlife women, what's probably at top of as we age. And so we know that when we get into the phase of deep sleep, we have something called our lymphatic system, which is basically the lymphatic system for our brain. And it's essentially wringing out the toxins as you sleep. And so you are improving your brain health when you get into that deep sleep. So that's super important to highlight. You also mentioned the weight loss. When we have good quality sleep, what we notice is that it regulates our hunger hormones, specifically leptin and ghrelin. And it helps us not eat the junk food. When we get sleep deprived, we are prone to eating the junk food, and we may not be as attuned to our satiety cues. So, those are some really elements of sleep for midlife women. Also, something that I don't think is talked about enough when we talk about the benefits of sleep is really the psychological ramifications of good sleep. So we know that when people sleep well, they have more empathy, they're more willing to resolve conflict, they're more open to other people. So I think that really, that's a good point to hit on, because as midlife women are navigating marriages, relationships, work relationships, having that solid sleep can help us navigate all of those relationships more smoothly. If we've had a good night of sleep, like we all can kind of relate to that. We've had a really bad night of sleep, we may be snappier to our partner, to our employee or whomever. So I just feel like that's an important part of sleep that doesn't get enough airtime.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I love that. That's so true. And why do so many women suffer from poor sleep?
Yeah, there are a few main reasons why this is happening. So number one, hormones, kind of an obvious reason. From teenagehood to menopause, there's a lot of hormone issues going on, hormones in flux. The second reason is really about mental health issues, like specifically depression and anxiety. So when you are depressed or have anxiety, that leaves you more vulnerable to sleep issues. And then third is really more of a socio-cultural reason. And that is because women are shouldered with so many roles. For example, a midlife woman could be dealing with teenagers or younger children at home. She could also at the same time be caring for aging parents. And while all that's going on, she could be at the top of her career game. Maybe she's a manager. So all of these competing demands could result in a lot of stress and anxiety, which is very counterproductive for sleep.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. How you talk a lot about morning and evening routines. Why are these so important?
Yes. So there's this wonderful quote by Louise Hay, "How you start your day is how you live your day." And people talk a lot about, the wind down routine, and that is so important. Don't get me wrong, but I think more emphasis really should be placed on the morning routine, because if we have something in place that sets our day with intention, it helps us buffer our day when we have stresses that come up throughout the day, because they happen. So if you're centered, grounded, have intentionality, it's going to be easier for you to navigate those stressors that pop up. So I'm a big proponent of morning routines and evening routines as well. I actually have created a free mini course that is just on that topic of morning and evening routines. It's called Sleep Reset Solution. And it's really about helping people who don't really have any routine in place. And they're sort of like, where the heck do I start? Because a lot of people really don't have any routine at all. I've worked with clients who, like, in the morning, they literally, like one woman she woke up and she grabbed a cup of coffee, and within 30 minutes she was at work. So she had literally just sprung out of bed, and there was nothing grounding her in her day and setting her up for a good day. So very, very important to consider some kind of morning practice.
I love that. It's not something I considered, that morning routine would help me with sleep. And I'm going to ask your opinion about this, because for entrepreneurs and business owners, there's a split on this. Like, there's the morning routine people who have like a couple hours of yoga, meditation, workouts, these things. And their morning routines are, like I said, maybe 1 to 2 hours. And then there's the people who are like, I say my prayer, I got my 3-minute meditation, I drink my coffee, and then I'm down into my computer. And I don't know, do you have any thoughts about, there's a wide range, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think you nailed it. I mean, like I, for example, have it's very lengthy morning routine. It's probably too long to even go into here, but that is the way that I've designed my life. But a lot of people don't really have as much agency over their time. For example, they may have children who have to be taken to school, to be dressed, to be fed. They have jobs they have to report to. But what you mentioned, even if you have like a couple of minutes, you do a 3-minute meditation, or you do some kind of practice, I think that's totally fine. Like even if you have 10 minutes, but having that consistent time that gives you that anchor and sort of that ability to be intentional and decompress a little bit before your day kind of goes off, I think is great. So I think it's really an individual preference, and it's sort of like, do whatever you have the time for. And if you don't have a lot of time, like don't beat yourself up for that. Just find something and do it regularly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You've talked a little bit about sleeping pills. What are your thoughts about sleeping pills in general? Because there are a number of supplements and pills now that are available.
Yeah. So I think that in my experience, what has happened with sleeping pills is that, unfortunately, family doctors, not to pick on family doctors, but they're only given a couple hours of sleep education in medical school for the most part. And so when a patient comes to them with insomnia or a significant sleep issue, quite often the doctor will just give a sleeping pill, which is fine in some circumstances. For example, there's a death, a divorce, a crisis, to get that patient through a very hard time in their life. But what I have found happens with a lot of my clients is that the physician never gives them an exit strategy for getting off the pills. So I think that's kind of where there's a disconnect. And inevitably, I will see clients who have been on these pills for 15, 20 years, because the doctor never spoke with them about, hey, it might be time to stop taking the pill. So that's really my take on it. There is a time and a place, but I think that generally speaking, most doctors could do a better job with the counseling. But on the other hand, I do understand the way that our medical system is now is family doctors don't have a lot of time for visits. So I understand, how they might patients might be just given a prescription. So yeah, it's a tough issue for sure.
Yeah. And depending on when, even you talked about going on Ambien, and I think Ambien really had a heyday, right? For a little while. And, if you had shown up with that question in a different decade, you might have gotten a different answer, right? I mean, that's the, the pros and cons of trends. There are trends in medical care, right?
Yeah. I think Ambien did have its heyday, maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. I still see it sometimes, but there's always, I'm getting targeted ads all the time for different sleep medications because I'm in the sleep field. So I don't know a ton about the newer sleep medications, but there's always an ad. There's
melatonin over the counter as well.
Yeah. Melatonin, people ask me about that a lot. I think that melatonin has its place for sure, but it is often misconstrued as something that is going to sedate people and make them sleepy. It is actually more of a supplement of timing that is best used for maybe jet lag, circadian rhythm disorder. One thing about melatonin that I do want to point out is that there is a lot of concern with adulteration of the product. So they did some kind of study years ago where they just pulled melatonin pills off the shelf, and they found that when you looked at the pill itself, there was a discrepancy between what was actually in the pill and what was advertised on the bottle. So you could be getting a lot less melatonin than advertised or a lot more. And then if you consider that there could be side effects of that's kind of putting you at risk of, having that side effect. You don't know, nobody wants to have that grogginess side effect. So if people do want to experiment with melatonin, what I would recommend is really doing your due diligence with the supplier, the manufacturer, and making sure that it is a reputable brand. Like I wouldn't recommend somebody go to Costco and buy like their melatonin there, or any supplement for that matter, not to pick on Costco, but the bigger box stores. I think that the quality is probably not what it should be. But melatonin is, there's a lot of, I think, controversy about it. And I think that stemmed from a couple of years ago when there was a report of melatonin gummies and children overdosing on them. But I think it got a lot of really bad press. People were very, very scared. But I think in balance, it's a decent sleep supplement, but you have to use it, for the reason why that it was intended to be used. It's not going to knock you out and sedate you.
And it's not meant to be long-term.
Yeah.
I think I want to highlight a couple of things you said there. One is exit strategy is a good thing to think about with anything, whether you're taking it over the counter or with your doctor, because it's perfectly good to ask that question too. Like if you're going through grief and you've been given some sleeping pills, to ask the question, how should I use this? I don't plan to take these for always. So, how do I stop taking them? And then you might actually get some good answers. But yes, you're right. You do have to ask because your primary care doctor is short on time. And some of them are really good at explaining things and some of them are not.
Right.
So, but also with the supplements, to be very careful with those and not assume that they're going to be something you take all the time, every day, ongoing for sleep. So what is insomnia and how can it be treated?
So insomnia is defined clinically as difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up too early for 3 days, at least 3 days a week. For 3 months would be chronic insomnia. For acute insomnia, it would be less than 3 months. Okay. And so, oftentimes it is treated inappropriately by a sleeping pill when in fact, the American Academy of Physicians recommends CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, as first-line treatment for insomnia. Problem is, again, going back to the point about doctors being busy, a lot of doctors don't know what CBTI is. And if they do know what it is, they don't know who to refer to because unfortunately, there are not a whole lot of CBTI providers anywhere. There's a huge shortage of people who do this. But in short, cognitive behavioral therapy is sort of a collection of different techniques and methods that are used to help people have a better relationship with sleep and change some of the behaviors that are of detriment to their sleep. So behavioral things, the B of the CBTI, a lot of it is changing sleep-wake times, matching the time in bed that you have to the time you're sleeping, because we often see people with insomnia spending 10 hours in bed only to get 7 hours of sleep. So what we want to try to do is have them in bed for about the same time that they're sleeping. Also, like with the T part, or that is more of the thoughts and attitudes that we're trying to work to change, because often people come into insomnia with a lot of really negative beliefs about their sleep, a lot of negative self-talk. And so the CBTI techniques work to really kind of challenge negative thoughts and reframe them to be not necessarily like positive, like we don't want to have like toxic positivity, but really to make the thoughts and attitudes about sleep at least more neutral, so that they're not as damning to the person. Because a lot of times how we talk about our sleep, it will dictate how we sleep. A lot of it is a real mindset shift.
Yeah.
So CBTI has been around since like the 1980s, but still, there needs to be like, the word needs to be out about that more, because not enough people know what it is. And
I on the end of it?
It's insomnia.
Oh, okay. So it's people that know CBT, but know how with insomnia in particular.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's very different than, so we have CBT for, therapy, and it's not exactly the same thing. There's specific techniques and things that you do with the I part of the insomnia.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
I like what you said too, because I think that people, especially when they've gotten past that 3-month mark, start to feel like I am stuck with this. I am broken. I, it becomes an identity. I don't sleep well. My body cannot fall asleep. All those things. I don't know. Can you comment on that? Don't you?
Yeah, I
that?
see this all the time. And, acute insomnia is very normal, a normal reaction to deal after you're dealing with like a crisis. And most people resolve the acute insomnia on their own just by the circumstance going away. But quite often we find that even though the circumstance has gone away, that person has developed behaviors that are not compatible with sleep. And then that morphs into the chronic insomnia. And what you said is so profound, because there is this often identity that people have wrapped around, like, I'm a terrible sleeper. And they have this awful language that they use about their own sleep. And, things like, I can't sleep. Everyone can sleep. It's a biological function. But the reality is that sometimes it can be really challenging. So it's like just reshaping that belief and saying to yourself, I'm having some challenges sleeping, but I'm actively working on them, and I'm confident that I can get my sleep back on track. So much more of a productive statement than I've literally had a client say to me, my sleep sucks. Like, that's how she described her sleep. And I was like, let's go back and like reconstruct that. Yeah. So much of it has to do with your mindset. Mindset is so critical. And I don't think a lot of people realize that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they do. And I don't think that we even, you and I are in the coaching world, so we notice when people make these statements, but I think that people don't even notice that they're there, that the statements are there, if they haven't delved into this, or no one said, hey, maybe that's not your identity, but you have a challenge with this.
Right. Yeah. It can become a strong identity with a lot of people. In fact, I sometimes look at these Facebook groups for people who have insomnia. And if anyone's listening who has insomnia, please do yourself a favor and don't go on those support groups, because it is just like almost a competition in some ways to see who has the worst insomnia. And people are throwing out really bad advice. There was this one guy who was like very upset about his sleep, and someone hopped on a comment and said, have a couple of drinks, it'll relax you. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like actually harmful to the poor person who has insomnia. So yeah, just a little bit of a tangent, but just be careful with support groups, because unless they're moderated by a professional, like by another sleep coach or whatever. But the ones it's kind of the wild, wild west. You'll just get a whole bunch of like unhelpful advice.
Sure. This is kind of a tangent, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about grief.
Yeah.
I know sometimes people have a hard time sleeping when they're experiencing some grief from a loss that's just happened. But people also describe that grief happens in waves. So someone might be, let's say someone actually is doing better in general with coping and their sleep is a little better. Would it still be normal for them, like a couple months later when things start to stir up again, that they would also have sleep issues at that time? I mean, is this something that goes, or usually is the sleep part just at the beginning if it?
It's a really good question. And, to be truthful, I haven't really coached anyone who was dealing with acute grief, but I would imagine just that, grief does come in waves. So I could see potentially that would be, coming in that wave and then redisrupting their sleep. So in a situation like that, what I would do is I would try to work very hard with them on establishing behaviors that they can maintain to improve their sleep. But, again, I think that probably for someone like that, they might need potentially a sleep coach and a therapist to work through the grief, because that's a very, deep issue that needs to be addressed. And there's actually grief coaches who I know, surprisingly, who are amazing at this kind of stuff. So there's definitely help for people like that.
Yeah. And just knowing that can be normal is, I think, helpful sometimes for people too. So talk about the middle of the night wake ups. This is something that I got new at menopause, and lots of women, even if it's not a hot flash wake up, just a wake up in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
A midlife. Can you talk about
Yes.
about?
This is the most common complaint of my clients who happen to be mostly midlife women. So first off, I'll just say that it's normal to wake up in the middle of the night. Our sleep system is designed so that after we've completed a full cycle of sleep, we do have a brief awakening. And if that awakening is like less than 3 minutes, we are not aware of it. The problems creep up when we wake up and then we can't get back to sleep. That can create a problem. But what I see mostly in my practice as far as cause of wake ups, because when we have a wake up, we want to really look at it and say, what could be the root cause? And there are many, many root causes, but the three main root causes that I see in my client population are being too hot. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're having a hot flash, but they're sleeping hotter and just having that extra, heat in their body is waking them up. So in instances like that, what I suggest is really taking a good look at like your bedding, making sure that you've got cooling sheets. Bamboo is a great choice. Then the things that you sleep in, like if you could sleep naked, that works for some people. That would not work for me. So I use bamboo pajamas. And then the next level of intervention, which I have found to be life-changing for me as a 53-year-old, is like the 8 Sleep cooling mattress pad, life-changing, because you can adjust it to suit your needs so that you could cool yourself off, and it helps so much. So the second thing that I find with the wake-ups is blood sugar imbalance causing the wake-ups. So we have a lot of people who are doing intermittent fasting. And so they may not have eaten, they may have had early dinner and they don't have any kind of food before they go to bed. And what can sometimes happen is they have a blood sugar crash, and that creates this cortisol adrenaline spike, which is causing their wake up. So one test that I recommend people do if they're having an overnight wake up, or lots of them, is have a very small snack about an hour before bed. And the snack could contain, mostly protein, a little bit of fat, a little bit of complex carbs, something like Greek yogurt with almonds, or maybe half a banana with almond butter. And then seeing if that little snack prevents the wake up. Sometimes it does. It might not. Then the third major reason that I see, and this is something that I really feel like needs to be talked about much more often, is sleep apnea episodes. So what typically happens in midlife with women is that our sleep apnea rates match those of our male peers. So you often think about the person with sleep apnea being like the Homer Simpson, the guy with the big belly snoring on the couch, But in midlife, what we often see is women who aren't even overweight, who are thin, athletic, having some mild sleep apnea, and they're being woken up from their sleep because of these breathing irregularities. And a really, really scary statistic is that 90% of women who have sleep apnea go undiagnosed. So what often happens is a woman will go to her doctor and say, "Doc, I'm waking up a lot during the night." Now, they may be given a sleeping pill, incorrectly assuming that they have insomnia. So when you have a sleeping pill, which sedates you, that actually is counterproductive because it's relaxing your airways even more. So sometimes doctors will think, oh, she's got fatigue or she's depressed, thereby being given an antidepressant, which certainly isn't helping the sleep apnea. So there's this tool called the Stop Bang tool. It's a very short, like 5-question questionnaire that is often given as a screening tool for sleep apnea. And it's a great tool. However, it's not validated in midlife women. So what sometimes happens, I had this happen to an acquaintance of mine, is she went to her doctor with a sleep issue and she said, "I think I'd like to get a sleep study." And I think what they gave her was that Stop Bang questionnaire. And she probably didn't score high enough on it because it's not validated for a midlife woman. And so because she didn't score high enough, they didn't really approve her for the sleep study, which is really a shame, because what if she had sleep apnea and it didn't go diagnosed because the study was denied? So lesson in that is we need to be very proactive. If we feel like sleep breathing is an issue, we should be pushing our healthcare provider to recommend a sleep study. And then, the other thing is we can get sleep studies on our own. We can not a sleep study per se, but there are lots of devices that you can order as a consumer that you can have sent to your home. And it's a fairly accurate type of test to determine if there are issues with your sleep breathing. And at which point, if you've got that test that shows some irregularities, you could actually bring that to your doctor and say, I think we need to further investigate this, maybe with, an in-lab study or whatever. But I just feel like this is a topic that is not talked about enough. And the consequences of untreated sleep apnea and you could speak to this more than I could, but they're very serious, cardiovascular and metabolic issues. If someone is left untreated, for example, Carrie Fisher, Princess Leia, actually, she died of untreated sleep apnea. So, people are dying from this, and it's just, we need to be talking about it more often.
Yeah. I have a relative that died of untreated sleep apnea as well. It was surprising to me that was something that could happen.
Yes.
Yeah. That is interesting. And it's funny because I know that from talking actually just to friends because I don't work in the clinic anymore, but they actually send people home with these kind of first level devices at home that probably very similar to what you can order online. And that's kind of the first set anyway, before they decide to do an overnight thing in the sleep lab.
Yeah.
So sleep trackers give us some of this information. What do you think about sleep trackers?
Yeah, I think sleep trackers are a really great tool for a certain population. So if you're the kind of person who's a pretty decent sleeper, but you feel like there's room for improvement, and you're the kind of person who is able to look at data and then make behavioral changes according to that data, I think a sleep tracker is a wonderful tool. For example, a lot of people who get a sleep tracker will have a wake-up call. I know I sure did when this happened, is they really realized like how much alcohol was impacting their sleep, profoundly. They were like, wow. And they didn't like the numbers on their dashboard. And that could be an impetus to, cut back your consumption. So that's a great use case for a sleep tracker.
Mm-hmm.
Where we get into trouble with sleep trackers is often when people who have insomnia, chronic insomnia, are using them. Because what I have found is that people who are anxious sleepers, people who have insomnia, will often become more anxious about their sleep, and their sleep becomes worse because when you have more anxiety, your sleep is gonna get even worse, right?
Yeah.
So for people like that, I recommend that they not use a sleep tracker for that reason. They get typically very wound up, very caught up in the minutia, I didn't get enough deep sleep, I didn't get enough REM sleep. And it's just really not relevant, for them at that moment. Like, for example, if they are working on their insomnia and they get to a place where they're sleeping well and they want to kind of test out a sleep tracker, I think that's fine. Once they've gotten to the point where they're more stable, they can also use the data, like looking at it every day. For example, they could wear the ring every night, but then look at their data on a weekly basis. So they look at it with a little bit of a distance. I think sometimes if you're looking at it daily and you're kind of nervous about your sleep, that can just exacerbate issues, because you want to look at trends over time. You don't want to get so bogged down in the day-to-day of what the sleep tracker says.
Yeah. I have a relative who uses one and will call me and say, I feel so rested, but my sleep tracker said I didn't sleep well. And so now I'm really upset. And I tell this person, if you feel well, then that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
If you feel well rested.
I'm so glad you made that point, because that's really what it boils down to. Is it really doesn't matter what the data says, but if you feel well, then you've probably slept well. And they've actually done studies showing that. So if somebody had bad data and they thought they slept well, their view of their sleep gets skewed according to what the data says or what the data doesn't say. So really kind of tune into your own body and like, hey, how am I feeling, versus what the data said.
And you and I are both wearing Oura rings, and we my husband and I just got these and they've been very fun to watch kind of over time.
Yes.
But I have mornings where I wake up and I am, I feel not rested. And the thing gives me a nice score. It says, you were optimal last night. I'm like, this thing is no good. I want to throw it against the wall,
I've had the same thing happen. Like I've had days where they gave me like a 91 and I felt awful.
Yeah.
I felt like very groggy and not rested. And yeah, it's quite interesting to note the differences between how you feel with the actual score says.
But I like what you said about looking at a more high level, because I do enjoy looking at thinking about, okay, where's my deep sleep over time? Where's my REM sleep over time? And some people don't care about this data, but I think that's very fun to kind of watch.
Well, I agree. I mean, I've had my Aura for almost 4 years. Yeah. And so what I sometimes do is I'll do trends over time. And it's kind of neat because I can see over the years the improvements because I'm constantly trying to work on it. So that makes me feel, okay, I'm really doing something about it, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice to get that feedback.
And we got this at an end of a very stressful work cycle for me. So I was, looking at this data and thinking, I want to be better than this,
Yeah.
But it's really been motivating for me to do more of the active relaxation things that really help with stress over time. I mean, I think that's been a real plus for it. And then my sleep has been better.
Excellent.
Along with it. Yeah. Not to just share my story, but just so people can see that there are, you can look at the pieces that are helpful to you. Maybe thinking about things over time might be more helpful than worrying about just what it said about last night.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Looking at the big picture versus the minutia.
Yeah. And if you're not interested in them, maybe don't do them.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you, the Oura Ring in particular does tell you about whether or not you're stopping breathing, right? Or that's...
So that's interesting because it doesn't really, I don't know the particulars of this, but I do know that it is not an accurate way to screen. It can give you kind of a warning, but for example, I'll use myself as an example. I always get like very good breathing scores on the Oura Ring, but I use a Whisper patch, which is something that you can use for looking at sleep breathing related issues. And when I use that patch once a month, my breathing is like kind of borderline sleep apnea, like it kind of, you could make an argument for it being mild. So that just to show you right there, their Auras and, other sleep trackers, very not sophisticated enough in the breathing department to really give you an accurate picture. You need to dig deeper and to have a little bit more advanced technology for the breathing part. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for saying that. So that people, if you're thinking I'm tired during the day, or people tell me that I quit breathing, or I'm a known snorer on the ski trip with my girlfriends, that don't take what your tracker says and say, no, actually I'm fine because my tracker says I'm fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a very rough measure of breathing, not indicative of a true a sleep test at all.
Okay. And I've had, a good handful of clients who worked with me and lost, 10 or 15 pounds and then just could not budge from there. And we talk about sleep in the very beginning and I bring it up and we've had people who've been diagnosed with sleep apnea and they said, I just had no idea. I really didn't know I was sleeping that poorly. So
yeah.
They go in and check it out with their doctor and it turns out they are.
Yeah. Good. You flagged that.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely, one of the big pillars for weight loss. So but we don't always want to talk about all things.
Yeah, I know.
We all have our things we like to talk about, the things that we don't.
True.
So what are your to sum up, what are top tips and strategies to help us sleep better?
Yeah, there are a few that I would recommend for anybody who's wanting to begin a sleep improvement journey. So number one, get outside and experience the natural daylight as soon as possible after waking, without your sunglasses. Because when you do that in the morning, it really helps reset your circadian rhythm. And the reason why you don't want the sunglasses is because when the sunlight hits your retina, it's a cue to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is your circadian pacemaker, And when that happens, it's this beautiful cascade of hormones and neurotransmitters. So you get a little cortisol boost. The melatonin from that previous night gets suppressed, and the melatonin for the following night gets acute. So it's just a really beautiful thing to get that sunlight exposure. Even on a cloudy day, you're still getting benefits. The second thing I would suggest is keeping a regular wake up time every day. Again, that's another very important piece of keeping our circadian rhythm strong, regular. And then lastly, I would say, and I'm sure this is something you probably talk to your clients about a lot, but is exercise. Exercise is a really wonderful way to improve our sleep. And we have like 13 different meta-analysis studies showing that it improves deep sleep. And that's especially true with older adults. So it improves our sleep in a lot of different ways: efficiency, quality, latency. So, you don't have to do hard exercise to gain these benefits. Moderate exercise is going to give you amazing benefits for sleep.
Nice. I don't want to let all this go. Let's talk about, we hadn't addressed what you said about the wake up time. Because when I think we in our 20s, we do the short days and then the sleep in on Saturday and serve on Sat at 50, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what ends up happening and I have firsthand experience of this in my 30s. I would get up for work at 6 in the morning on weekdays. I would be up until like 1 o'clock on the weekends, and I would consequently sleep in, 2 to 3 hours longer than my morning wake up on the weekdays. And what ends up happening when you've got that big mismatch between your wake up times on days off versus work days is it creates something called social jet lag. And so you end up having an issue often of having trouble sleeping Sunday night because your body clock got skewed. And then Monday is a real drag. So people complain about Mondays all the time. People are like, Mondays suck. And, part of me is like, well, what did you do over the weekend with your sleep? Did you sleep in a lot? Your Mondays can be a lot better if you keep a regular wake up time on the weekends. Now, there's some nuance to that, because if you've stayed up really late and you want to give yourself an extra half hour, that is fine. You're really not going to throw off your circadian rhythm by a short amount of time on the weekend to sleep in, up to like half hour, 45 minutes. But if you're going 2 hours, it's a slippery slope.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing all this. These are super great practical tips. And it was fun to talk about the trackers because they're popular. I feel like, I think my husband and I got Oura rings because we knew a bunch of people had them, and they thought they were really fun and helpful. And so we all kind of talked these things around in our circles, the different watches. And so they're definitely out there and people are enjoying them. So
yeah, well, this has been fun. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. Well, I will make sure that everything we have talked about is in the show notes, how to connect with you. We'll make sure we have the Stop Bang questionnaire. Just even though it's not maybe the very best tool for midlife women, it has some good questions to ask yourself, I think, still. And your mini course too. So for people who aren't going to be able to look at the show notes, can you tell everyone?
Sure.
Where to find you?
You can find me at my website, morganadams.wellness. Sorry, that was morganadamswellness.com is my website. My Instagram handle, where I am very often, is morganadams.wellness. So if you want to connect with me on Instagram and shoot me a DM and say hi, I will respond back. If you have a sleep question, send it my way. I love chatting about sleep, obviously.
Super, super. And the free mini course, is that on your website if people go there?
Yes, it is. It is right there, front and center. You can't miss it.
Super. All right. Thank you again for being here and sharing all
Thank you, Heather.
Great information.